Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Noble Nine's webinar on the business impacts of using SLOs, as well as some strategies on implementing them in your organization and encouraging adoption. So we have over 100 people on the call, so we're going to make this as interactive as well, maybe not as interactive as possible, but as we go through, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A link down below, and we're going to try to get to everybody's questions at the end. Our agenda for today is after we get through introductions, we're going to go through some quick fundamentals of why do we want SLOs, what are SLOs, and then we're going to go through strategies for SLOs and their business benefits. From there, we'll go into a question and answer session. And like I said, we're going to try to get to everyone's questions. So at the end of this, if you happen to have any additional questions you want to email us, there is a small link you'll see at the bottom of this screen on the bottom right that says hello@noble9.com. That's our email address. And we're going to go right into an introduction of our speakers. Excuse me. So you guys may have heard of or have enjoyed the book of Alex Hidalgo. So Alex is the principal reliability advocate at Noble 9 and author of Implementing Service Level Objectives. During his career, he has developed a deep love for sustainable operations, proper observability, and using SLO data to drive discussions and make decisions. Alex's previous jobs have included IT support, network security, restaurant work, t-shirt design, and hosting game shows at bars. When not sharing his passion for technology with others, you can find him scuba diving or watching Premier League football. He lives in Brooklyn with his partner Jen and a rescue dog named Taco. Alex has a BA in philosophy from Virginia Commonwealth University. You'll also meet Shrikar Achanta during our Q&A session. He has over 20 years experience in implementing APM and observability solutions at Fortune 10 companies. Over the years, Shrikar has worked in engineering, technical support, operations, pre-sales, and post-sales solutions, architectural roles, and brings a wealth of experience in managing digital transformation projects at large organizations. Shrikar has a master's degree in computer science from the University of South Carolina and enjoys gardening in his home in in California. We're going to go ahead and hand it over to Alex.
Hey, everyone. Welcome. We're going to start off with kind of like a story, basically. Why do we want SLOs? Well, the thing is that people expect things to be perfect, yet that's not how things actually work. Perfection is not available to you in the real world. Nothing actually is. Striving for 100% is impossible, and therefore your computer services can never be 100% either, and you shouldn't strive for it. And that's where service level objectives come into play, SLOs. They're a way for you to set more reasonable targets, right? Let's try to be 99.9% reliable instead of, let's say, 100, and set reasonable targets so you don't burn people out. And of course, Google, this is where service level objectives came from. It's not actually true. They were probably developed at HP well before that, but Google's definitely one that really put them into play for operational purposes. And they're the ones that made them famous because of these books, of course. Like these books cover SLOs in depth, and they really talk a lot about how to use them as SRE, right? These are the SRE books. And the way SLOs are laid out here is primarily about how they can be used for operational tasks, right? How can you make sure that the services you're responsible for are running well enough without spending too many resources on making them attempt to run close to 100%? And so we often think about SLOs as doing things like preventing bad alerts, right? Threshold alerts are bad. We've been told that over and over again. Instead, use your error budget burn rate or only alert if you're about to be out of error budget. We do this because we want to avoid the bad alerts, the ones that wake you up at 3 a.m. for no reason at all. But it's not just about good alerts, and it's not just about operations. We could spend several hours talking about how to use SLOs operationally only, but I want to talk today a bit about how they might be used in more business-oriented settings. Because the concept behind SLOs is basically this quote by Voltaire: "Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good." Right? You only have to be good enough. And the reason I bring up this quote is because it's hundreds and hundreds of years old, which is just kind of proof that humans already know this in all of our domains. Everyone's cool with a certain amount of failure, as long as things don't fail too often. And don't strive for perfection, because good is probably good enough. And this is kind of proof that you can really apply these SLO-based philosophies to everything that you do. And actually, it's interesting to point out that that quote is actually a failure in and of itself, because Voltaire never said that. What he actually wrote was, "The better is the mortal enemy of the good." So what do these things mean for me? What does not striving for perfection, but striving for good enough mean for me? And what does that mean for my business? So to start off with, just want to do a quick overview of what SLOs actually are. So there's these three fundamental truths at the base of using SLOs. All right, reliability is the most important feature of your service. If it's not being reliable, it's not really doing much. And we define reliable here as, is it doing what your users need it to do? So that's the second point. Your users determine how reliable you are, not you. And the reason for this is because everything can look fine on your end. Everything can look fine in your logs, and all your pods are up and running, right? All these operational things. But if the users can't use your service for what they need it to do, it's not being reliable. And then finally, as we discussed, nothing works all the time, so don't aim for it. And the way we do this is, first you have service level indicators. They're just a measurement used to define how a service is operating, and ideally from your user perspective. SLIs feed SLOs, and an SLO is now a percentage. It's a target for how often you want your SLI to be telling you that things are going okay. And this feeds into an error budget. An error budget is basically a way of calculating or thinking about how your SLO has performed over a certain time window. It's a lot more interesting to be able to say, look, we've performed this well over the last month or the last 2 weeks, or even the last quarter or the last year, as opposed to how are we operating right now. And the error budget is really the thing that lets you have better discussions, right? It gives you a data point to say, what does this mean for us? Should we change our focus? And of course, then here we have the primary original example from the first Google SRE book. The basic idea being, if you have error budget, ship features. If you don't, stop and fix your reliability. But you can use these for so much more. So let's get into these 5 strategies that we promised you. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to talk about a few different personas that might also use SLOs that aren't just SRE, aren't just operational people looking to keep services running reliably on their own. So we're going to talk a bit about how team managers and project managers can use SLOs, how managers of managers can use SLOs, how staff plus engineers, the ones that may not be directly involved with production on a day-to-day basis, but are still fulfilling engineering roles, how they may use them. We'll talk about how executives, the C-level, like anyone that's really driving business level decisions, how they may use SLO data. And finally, we'll talk about a secret fifth thing. So how might team managers or project managers use SLOs? Well, the basic here is, what are we going to do in our next sprint, for example, right? We can use this data not just to respond to a potential incident or respond to a series of unreliability events. We can use this data to look into the future and say, okay, our error budget status for this service is this. Should we maybe change up our sprint? Because SLO data helps you uncover all sorts of problem spots. It helps you realign expectations with people, right? Like you can say, look, I know that we promised to do this, but really our SLOs are telling us that we need to focus on this other thing instead. So now you have numbers to go to other teams with and other stakeholders and just kind of explain, and it might not just be changing your next sprint focus. You may have to blow up the entire roadmap, because SLOs give you that extra little bit of data. But you can also use error budgets creatively. And I've actually done all these things, right? Ticket completion rate, you don't want to make it a race or anything, but it still can help you over time to look over the last quarter. Are we meeting the target we set for how many of these tickets we're going to close? If you're not, that doesn't necessarily mean anything's bad, but at least you have the number to look at and ask yourself, do we need to change something about our process? Maybe not. Maybe it was just a busy quarter, or a lot of people were out on vacation, or, but the point is you have this number now that you can more easily look at. I've also actually used this kind of set a budget for how long it could go before I went and checked with one of my teammates. Hey, you haven't taken a vacation in a while. Maybe you should. And also for sprint retros, this one was kind of neat. We set a budget for ourselves that if we had not changed something about the process of our sprint retrospective within a 90-day period, that we were forced to change something just to keep things interesting and change up how we were thinking about our progress over time. Now, it might be that change was not a good one and you immediately roll back, and that's fine. This is just like shipping code to production. So how might managers of managers use this kind of data? So kind of similarly to how a manager or a project manager may use this data, you can extend this out even further, right? This isn't just about a single team. It could be, what should my organization be focused on over the long term? So, service level objectives, they're target values for service reliability. They're a framework for helping you think about how your computer services have been running. And they tie directly, in my opinion, into how OKRs work, right? A framework for setting and measuring ambitious goals, but also OKRs kind of as originally developed, right? You're not supposed to meet every single OKR perfectly. If you are, you weren't ambitious enough, right? So that's like setting a target percentage, just like how an SLO may help you set a target percentage. And OKRs help you align across the org, the same way that SLOs can help alignment across individual engineering teams. And in my opinion, SLIs are basically just a different term for KPI. So they both identify important parts of a system, either a computer system or a business system, and they both look to inform your decision-making. And they should both be tracking things that are important to your users. So an SLI might be a user flow, right? A literal user flow through your product. And a KPI might be your conversion rate, but they're both still measurements of, are our users happy? Are our customers happy? And by using long-term SLO data, you can have better conversations about how have teams been performing over time. You can use this data perhaps to make staffing decisions, right? Maybe this part of the organization has been dealing with much more unreliability. Maybe they need more people. Maybe you need to move some people around. Not saying you do, but again, the point is, at least now you have this data to look at to help you decide. Next, how might very senior engineers use SLOs? Very often they already used SLOs when they were, on an individual team responsible for an individual service, but now they may be looking at cross-org projects, right? Very large-scale things that may take months, if not years, to complete. And without SLOs, it can often be difficult to figure out exactly what the impact of those large-scale projects were. The point here is, and this is not just for staff plus engineers, right? Like this is relevant for everyone. Use your SLO data not just with the time window that you have configured, right? People often pick 2 weeks or 4 weeks, 28 days, 30 days. Sometimes SLOs are set to calendar months because they're explicitly defending an SLA, which is contractually often tied to calendar months. But that same data that you've collected, if you keep it for a month, a quarter, a year, maybe multiple years, you can go back and look at how things performed over that lengthy time period. And this can really help you think about, how did this large-scale project work? Did it temporarily cause periods of unreliability before it fixed them? Or maybe everything actually ended up worse. What is the impact of everything that we spent all this time working on? And a great example of this is did a migration go well? It's very important to be able to look at the performance of your service, to be able to look at your SLI pre and post migration, whether or not that be a database type, an upgrade to your Kubernetes cluster, maybe you're moving from one cloud to another or on-prem to the cloud. You need to be measuring across that entire time period to truly understand what was the impact of this large project. Next, how might executives and or the C-level use them? And, this doesn't, again, it doesn't have to be literal executive levels. These are just the personas I came up with to talk about these different kind of approaches. And here, of course, it's a business. At the end of the day, you're there to make money. How can we increase our profitability? And that's a great way that SLOs can help you think about things, because aiming for perfect is not just impossible. It is expensive, very expensive. The closer you try to get to 100%, the more you're going to spend in various different ways. And it's kind of like a limit approaching infinity. You'll never get there. And the thing is, your users don't need you to anyway. So SLO data helps you say, okay, what is the least reliable we can be and still keep our users happy? Because setting those lower targets generally means that you're spending less money in various different ways. Cloud and compute spend, first off, right? If you're trying to be even if you're not aiming for 100, right? Even if you're aiming for 99.99%, right? That costs a lot in terms of how replicated things have to be, how robust they have to be, and that means more cloud spend. Just pure number of instances you have, and you're gonna have to run multi-region or perhaps even multi-cloud if you're aiming for very, very high targets. Everything becomes multi. Your staffing costs, not only are you gonna need more engineers to actually build these more robust and more resilient systems, but you're going to have more engineers across the globe, most likely. You're going to need to have a follow the sun rotation for your on-call in order for people to respond to things quickly enough to hit those high targets. So now location costs, you might have to open new offices just to ensure that you have people ready and able to fix things in case they go wrong at the wrong time. So here for leadership at any level, I really want to say, don't demand too much from your organization. These are what these targets actually look like. And I feel like this is often a little eye-opening for people, right? To put it this way, because it's very common to be like, okay, we are an important service. We need to have 5 nines. We want to be 99.999% reliable. But what that translates to is that means you can only have 26 seconds of downtime every month. How can people respond to that? Yearly, that's only 5 minutes and 13 seconds. So how could you possibly have, during an incident, someone respond to the page quickly enough and then also fix things within 5 minutes? Very few people can do this. Everything's going to have to be automated. You're going to have to be running in regions and cells all over the world. Not saying that you haven't hit this before, but it's very, very difficult. And even if you have, it's unlikely to continue into the future. But even something like 99.99%, 4 nines, again, you'll see, on a monthly basis, 4 minutes and 21 seconds. I mean, if you have an incident in that month, again, ask yourself, can your engineers actually respond quickly enough? Again, you have to spend a lot of money and a lot of time making things this reliable. And again, users probably don't need you to. For example, look at 99.95. That alone jumps things up. Right? 21 minutes or 4 hours of downtime a year. And this is what most cloud services give you in the first place, right? This is what an EK2 instance is promised to be up, for example. So if that's what you're relying on at any point in your architecture, you probably can't promise anything above this anyway. If you're running in the cloud, it's very difficult to get to things like 99.99%. And even things like 99.9, if you think of this as not necessarily downtime, these could be periods of unreliability. So maybe things are just slower or not. If you're, I don't know, like a web retailer of some sort, right? And your website is degraded in some way for 43 minutes a month, it's not really going to impact your bottom line. So why not aim for that and spend less money? And now finally, as we close up this little part of the presentation and move to the Q&A, I promise you this secret fifth thing. And it's operations. Your engineers are your most important resource in all of this. Everything about your business cannot be built without them. So make sure that you're not stressing them out. Make sure you're not placing too much load on them. Let them set reasonable targets. Don't ask them to try to ensure that their services are 99.99% reliable if they don't have to be, because it's a real human cost here, and your business is not going to succeed without your operational engineers. Don't burn people out. Don't wake them up at 3 a.m. Don't expect the impossible. So I want you to think, no matter what your role is, no matter what your title is, maybe you're an individual contributor fresh out of college, or perhaps you are the CEO, anything in between. What does reliable mean for me? And what does not aiming for perfection mean for me? Thanks. And Shrikar, let's move into the Q&A.
Excellent. So can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I'm good. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for a great review of the strategies. They are great. The last secret thing actually piqued my interest, and it turned out to be a stunner. So can you elaborate more on how engineering job satisfaction, like engineers' job satisfaction measure is crucial in delivering reliable software, like why it is being overlooked and what are other negative consequences for it, like turnover, churn in the employees, and maybe even more money spent with 24/7 shifts to be managed for this and so on.
Yeah, I think you touched on one of the most important parts, which is churn, right? It is expensive to hire. Not only is it expensive to hire, but it's then expensive to train people, and you're going to have to train them. And not only is losing employees due to burnout or other unrealistic expectations being placed upon them, you're going to start getting a bad rep, right? You're going to get a reputation of being an employer that's not fun to work for. And even in current market conditions, software engineers, site reliability engineers, they're always in demand. There's always something that they can find, and just be careful about that, right? These unrealistic expectations that no one can achieve. It's just a very good way of losing those engineers and getting a bad reputation.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think that's one of the best reasons why to have a SLO strategy in place, where you actually think about like not being perfect, right? So once you don't have these kind of measures in place where you have some error budget to have a wiggle room for people to move around, it is very difficult to actually put a bar on. So another rather frustrating aspect with the SRE's job, especially, is to how to influence the engineering team and the executive team to pay more attention to the software reliability in general. Like, what is the role of SLOs in making reliable software like a shared responsibility for of all the stakeholders? Like a product is involved here, the engineering is involved. Of course, operations are part of SRE. So how does that play around with how SLOs can actually improve that aspect of it?
So I think SLOs are very important communication tools, right? They're a way for you to go across engineering, operations, product, and agree upon, here's how reliable we're going to aim to be, and have everyone agree upon, if we don't hit those targets, what are we going to do, right? Let's get into a room and talk about it. And so not only are you getting alignments, but you can also use these numbers to help cross-team alignment, right? Perhaps another team relies on your software, right? You're the front end, you need the database to run well. Together now, across multiple engineering teams, multiple operations teams, and multiple product teams, you can now all get together and agree, here's how reliable we're going to be for each other. So I think that's my first thought there, is just they're not just ways for a single team to use them. They're ways for communicating cross-team, cross-org. Here's both what we're agreeing upon, and here's what we are able to promise to each other.
Yeah, excellent. I think that is also one of the main reasons why a SLO is actually an SLO only when we involve all these people in creating an SLO, I guess, right? So product has to say that this has to be the acceptable, reliable performance of this particular API, for example, or the engineering has to say it is possible to create a service or a product that is aligned to that one, for example, right? And so I think you have to involve all of them to actually get a right SLO.
Sure. And what I think you are often going to see is that, product and engineering perhaps want to aim very high. Product thinks that they need to be very reliable for customers. And engineers sometimes, not always, but, think that their code is better than it actually is, right? So they want to aim for something very high. But then if you can then get the operational folk involved, well, they're going to want as low of a target as possible, generally speaking, because that means their jobs are easier, right? These are all kind of stereotypes. For those on the call, I don't mean to say that you necessarily fit into those buckets, right? But the idea here is you have some people aiming for a high target, some people, sorry, I should say, some people aiming for a target that's probably too high. You have some people aiming for a target that's probably too low, and now you can compromise in the middle. And then you can also understand as you move forward in time that SLOs are not agreements, they're objectives, right? And I make that distinction because it means that you can renegotiate them at any point in time, right? So you settle on that middle ground in between the people that want a very high target and the people who want a lower target. And then you can still say after a month, a quarter, or a year, is this still a reasonable target for us?
Excellent, excellent. And for most of the material that you covered, it's very intuitive to an engineer, like somebody who's actually working with the software, either operating it or building it and so on. Some things like, for example, you can't manage something that you can't measure, right? SLOs are a excellent way of measuring reliability. So you need to have a definitive measure of that so that you can actually manage and deliver reliability. Another one is it's a team sport, right? We need to get reliability settings from everybody, like from product and so on. All that is fine, but how can we involve executive staff in these decisions? Like, what is your experience with what executive staff care about, how they can use SLOs in their day-to-day operations and priorities?
Well, it takes a while to get there in terms of your telemetry, what kind of data you have available to you. But once your organization is sufficiently advanced there, you cannot just set SLOs on like, how is this API performing, right? You can start setting SLOs on actual user flows, right? How does the checkout process work on my retail website, right? And that involves many teams. And now that SLO might have to be owned by a product owner or maybe a director, right? And now perhaps you have a suite of products, and perhaps the VP of engineering needs to be responsible for the SLO or SLOs that measure how that entire suite of products works, you know, and I've seen this and have helped implement it, right? Like, this is not pie in the sky stuff necessarily. It takes a while to build the culture, but you can get all the way to the point that the executives may be able to look at 2 or 3 numbers and decide, is our business operating the way it's supposed to, right? Because you have SLOs made up of data from across your entire company. Again, not easy, takes a long time to get there, but you know, beyond just the kind of anecdotic stories that I told in that brief presentation, you know, you can get to the point where you have just a handful of numbers that the people at the very top of the company can look at and say, okay, last year or last quarter, here's how we performed. That's not good enough. Or maybe we perform too well. Maybe we can cut some of our cloud spend, whatever it is, you know. But the point again is at least you have those numbers to have those conversations in the first place.
Excellent. Yeah, I think they care about actually optimal performance of the whole company. So SLOs actually are a important part of it. Excellent. I think I'm almost close to the end of it. So one of the things that the whole SRE community is grateful to you personally for your seminal work that you've done on the implementing SLOs part, like think somewhere around like 2016 when SRE, like Google came with this SRE handbook, and then they followed up with workbook and so on. Mostly it was a concept. There were not much details around it. If an organization wants to adopt it, they don't have much guidance around it. And then your book came around on all the calculations, like what it needs to be, why it needs to be implemented, and what actually really entails in doing it. So SLOs are now part of like many popular observability platforms, and we also have our Noble 9 Reliability Center, like which is a dedicated platform that actually takes data sources from multiple observability vendors. So how has the world changed in the last 4 or 5 years since you published your book? And I think you can even talk about how your next edition as well, like how things are actually panning out in the coming year.
The biggest thing I've seen is just more and more people are interested in the topic, right? Like anything else, you know, things follow the hype cycle, right? Like the Gartner idea of a hype cycle. First, something is just very, very exciting. people start to want to do it. Marketing starts to take over, and it becomes the hip new thing. And every CTO is now saying, "Oh, we got to do SLOs." We need to be doing observability instead of monitoring. We need to be, oh, OTel. Everyone, like, we've got to do OTel. And often these things are good, right? But then things kind of settle in to a slightly more boring phase. And I think that's actually where we're starting to see SLOs get to. And that's good, because that means more and more people are using them and more people are seeing the benefit of them, right? Eventually, something should settle down into this is just part of what we do, right? At first, God, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, right? And being able to move from manual golden copy style system configurations to the world of Chef and Puppet about 14, 15 years ago blew everyone's mind. It changed everything about how I thought about computers, and that was great. And then that got boring, right? And then suddenly Terraform showed up, right? And now everyone's using Terraform, and that's actually settled into pretty boring at this point. Just as I think that's the biggest thing I've seen change about SLOs in the last 4 years, since the book came out, is that for a lot of people, they're just part of what they do. And I think it's very, very important.
Excellent. Excellent way to actually conclude this part of the Q&A session. So I'll actually go over some of the questions that we have from the audience. We'll try to take as many as we can. We can actually go beyond 8:45. Like, if anybody wants to stay back, you can. But we will be sending answers to everybody. All the questions that we will cover those eventually, right? If not in this webinar, we'll follow up with you on those. So the first question here is more like, let's say we have a SRE team that has observability in place for a while. They have these SLIs that they might not think of that as SLIs, but they have a lot of metrics coming from these observability tools. What is your best plan in transitioning, like how to transition over to SLOs, or maybe first steps that they are taking to implement SLOs? What is your guidance to that, to those teams who've been using their observability tools for over many, many years?
Yeah, so chances are, if you do already have good data, like coming in, as you mentioned, you probably already have reasonable measurements for your SLIs. But an SLO is just a way of better thinking about that data over time. It transforms it into a conversational tool from a purely operational one. And it's those discussions that are really important, right? So my general recommendation for people trying to get started is identify a few of these SLIs, set some reasonable targets on them, and see over time how they perform, and see if that's good enough for the people who depend on you, or whether or not that's good enough for you. Like maybe you yourself feel like you're either running too well or not well enough. So like, just get started small, and it doesn't have to be a rush. You don't have to immediately jump head in and say everyone has to be doing SLOs immediately. We're turning off all of our other monitoring. No one actually ever gets there. You're always going to have different ways of measuring things. SLOs are not a perfect solution, right? But they are a better source of data than just raw metrics.
Excellent. So what I have actually seen in implementing observability solutions over the years is like, you, even for the SLO project, you have 80-20 rule. Like, just by identifying the SLIs, you can actually get look at the literature on like what SLIs are in the first place and stuff. Identifying the SLIs will get you 80% into your project, like 80% benefits of the whole SLO implementation in general, right? The other 20% is actually to put error budgets, defining all those. So very like identifying SLIs, trying to keep them in mind is like very critical, as part of that. So the next question is around like, I think when they say, are you working on to get a better integration with Datadog? I think you might be referring to the Noble 9 part of it, and interfacing with public APIs and so on. If
I
you're
think
referring to the
we'll I think we'll answer that one via email.
yeah, we'll get back to you with more details on specifically how we support that part, APIs as well as that. And so I think the next one is about like, can you go with a very high level overview on what distinguishes from like an SLA and SLO? Maybe I think you covered it for a little bit in the presentation, but if you can give us a very high level view of that one.
Sure. I mean, the main difference is literally in those last two letters, right? Like an SLA is a contractual agreement to provide a service at a certain level, and if you don't, you owe someone something, right? Whether it's credits or whether it's money, right? So that works just fine for like a paying customer, perhaps. But SLAs are also mostly there for lawyers. They mostly exist so that a contract can be broken if the SLA is not met often enough, but they're still there, right? And you don't want to break your SLAs. That's how you end up owing someone something. That's how you may end up losing customers. So what you do is you set an SLO that's more strict than your SLA. So your SLA is 99.95%. You set an SLO that's 99.9%. And what this does is if you let you get, sorry, the other way around, right? SLA of 99.9% and perhaps an SLO of 99.95%. And what this does is if you're actually aiming for 99.95, you will know ahead of time if you're trending to exhaust that. And therefore, you know before you get there that you can defend the SLA by trying to hit that 99.95 target instead of breaking the 99.9% agreed contractual SLA.
And so, and next question is about like, when you come up with a value, like for example, 99.99 SLO target, do you include the incidents, like, are they just incidents or even planned downtime is added into that? Like, how do you actually distinguish between the time that you're spending on planned downtime with outages as such?
There's simply just two different approaches, and to me, it's just about what your tools can do, and as well as just what it feels more comfortable for your team, your organization. But they're basically the same, right? I mean, the easiest is just to bake that into your target, right? Like we think we can hit 4 nines, right? We think we can do that, but we know that every year we have a certain amount of downtime, and that means we can just absorb that, right? Like that's what an error budget's for. It's about absorbing failure. So you think your service can run at 4 nines, but you set your SLO at 3.5 nines because you've pre-planned for those outages. For some people, though, they would rather just exclude that time from their calculations, and that's fine too. Both achieve the same goal, right? Which is just measuring over time how you're performing and if you're performing well enough. And so either approach works. I really think it's whatever is most comfortable for you, what's easier for you to do, depending on how you do your SLO calculations. And also just similarly, again, culturally, perhaps there's a ton of pressure to set very high targets that you can't, that you could meet unless you have without those planned downtime periods, maintenance periods. So then perhaps you just stick with that high target and just exclude them from your calculations.
Excellent. Yeah, I think there are even some features in some new tools wherein you can specify the times where you want to exclude those times out of your calculation. So you can go with that option as well. So I think we're at the top of the hour. We will be continuing our discussion, like for people who can actually can stay back. You feel free to stay on the WebEx. Sar, we have any concluding comments? Like we are at top of the hour, like at 8:45 right now.
Well, I thank everybody for joining. I think we were up to about 126 people at one point, and hopefully this was beneficial to everyone.
Thank you.
If you have any questions or anything that you want to contact us about, please send an email to hello@noble9.com. And we will also be following up with the recording and additional emails.
Thank you. And then we'll be continuing with our Q&A with what we have from over here. So please stay back if you can. And thanks, Sal. So another question is, do you see any benefits with combining SLO adoption with DORA metrics? How they are related to each other?
Interesting. I think that they're both slightly different approaches, but absolutely complementary. In fact, some of the work done in how SLOs help you explain incidents better has actually changed in the most recent DORA guidance how to think about mean time measurements, right? Mean time to failure, mean time to like resolution. So they're very similar in the sense that similar people are working on these frameworks. And they definitely inform each other, especially conceptually. DORA existing makes SLO-based approaches better, right? As people learn how to use SLO data better, or how to even generate the right data for SLOs. I don't know if I've seen anyone directly like set an SLO on one of their DORA metrics directly, right? I think they kind of live separately, and like it's fine, but they definitely influence each other and live in the same world, right? Like they're roommates, I think. But I think they both achieve slightly different things. And that's good because neither one is a complete solution for all of your problems. It's yeah, like they're pretty good friends, I think. Now, like I see the questions actually specifically about from both. I see this question was actually specifically about combining the adoption at the same time. I think that could make sense in the sense that if you're looking for cultural transformation, perhaps you do that on multiple fronts at once. But my go-to phrase is, right, like it depends. I think it depends on where you are in these journeys. What does it look like for your team, right? Ask yourself, would it make sense to combine these adoptions for me, right? What does it mean for me? I can see it working well. I could absolutely see there being benefits there, but I could also see there being downsides if it's too much culture change for your organization all at once.
And the next one is actually touches upon the topic that you actually referred to a few times in your presentation, and we talked about it, but it's worthwhile to double tap on it once more. So the question is around okay, we talked multiple times about like involving multiple stakeholders in having an SLO adoption, like successful SLO adoption. But can you talk a little bit more on how the actual logistics work? Like who needs to come up with, for example, there is a idea that maybe the SLOs really need to come from the product when they are designing in the PRD, should specify some to a certain degree, like let's say this page has to load within 300 milliseconds for the way that the customer uses this page, for example. Can you come up with some strategies for the team on how this buy-in comes in? Like, what is the best way to negotiate between various teams?
All right, you lost me a bit about the PRD thing. As a side note, yes, I think that during the design phase, you should already be thinking about these kind of targets. But in terms of the buy-in, depending on your organization size and their general maturity in adopting SRE style approaches, DevOps style approaches, generally what I recommend is that you need at least one champion for SLOs, someone who explicitly, at least some percentage of their time, is to go around and help explain concepts, develop and run workshops, educational materials, someone who has at least some percentage of their time set aside to go sit with another team and help them set the first few SLOs, help them see the benefits of it, so then they can go explain this to others and help it grow, right? But I definitely think you need at least one person or perhaps an entire team. I often see this with teams tasked with observability, like going out and doing this. But like the buy-in's not always easy, because for some people, this concept of not being perfect can be like a bit odd. But that's why I love things like the real world analogies, right? I love that Voltaire quote because everyone knows it, or think they know it, right? As we showed, but and be like, look, everything fails at some point. I love real world examples like, if you order a pizza and you ordered a pepperoni pizza and it shows up as a plain cheese, well, that's a failure, right? But whatever, it's not that big of a deal, as long as it's not the case that every single time you order from that pizza place that you get the wrong order, right? If that happens consistently, you're going to change pizza places, right? Your company is going to lose customers, right? That's the same for any of your services, right? Or if you have a streaming service is what you're using at home, right? You want to watch a movie, it buffers a few seconds, that's fine. And you don't care if it buffers 4, 5, 6 seconds, maybe even 10 seconds. Maybe you start to get annoyed at 15 seconds though. But again, as long as it's not 15 seconds every single time, as long as it happens, let's say 1 in 100, right? So 99% target for buffering less than 15 seconds or less than 10 seconds, whatever the actual threshold that people that can handle is, then you're still being reliable enough. So I like to get those kind of examples in front of people, because then they can immediately think, oh yes, that's true for me, right? It's true for me that I accept a certain amount of failure just out in the world by the services provided to me, right? Restaurants are a great example because it's literally the service industry and it's literal servers bringing you the things that you requested, right? May be able to see some parallels there in the language we use, so get in front of people with real world examples. If you have a few teams doing SLOs and they've seen the benefit, get those teams in front of other people and be like, look, here's what we've seen. Here's how it's helped us. And again, I'll go back to that first thing. To really get buy-in cross org, you probably need someone who feels armed with the right arguments to make and the right data, who has to be dedicated at least a certain amount of time to this.
Excellent. Yeah. So one way, so just to summarize what you said, those are great examples. SLOs actually define what needs to be sent, provided to your customers, right? And when you define these ones, you go to individual teams, like for example, the product team itself or the engineering team. And when when you sit with them and then discuss about what is the product that is being built, what is supposed to serve, and in what parameters it needs to do, and then everybody actually agrees to those ones, then that becomes an SLO, and that's something that should not be changing every week or every 2 weeks or by convenience, right? Because we actually came up with these standards for this product to be successful in the market. Either that is driven by a competitor, it could be driven by what a user is expecting from it, from your product, and so on. So that actually gives some level of buy-in, and then it actually also puts a right bar for what needs to be served to the customer, so that it's easy when a operation person goes to engineering and say, oh, we are not hitting these ones. Can we just hold on to any other things before we until the time we actually meet our expectations for this one, and so on. So that's one of the important reasons why we need to have a buy-in. And yeah, that's a good point. So so what thoughts are in discussion with the bottom line to the company, right? Systems being 100% available. I think the question is about accepting the reality of downtime. I think the question is around why it's not a good idea to always aim for 100% reliable software, even though it might think as a good way to go for. Why aiming 100% is not a right idea all the time.
It's never a good idea because you can't ever do it.
Yeah.
So I don't see the benefit in trying, because again, you're going to spend too much money. I think this question is the one that said accepting the reality of reliability is hard to take when any downtime means lost revenue. Sure, but you're actually going to spend more, right? It's actually better for your bottom line to absorb a certain amount of failure with your lower targets, because you're going to spend so much more money trying to get as close to 100% at, like, as possible, right? So sure, you lose some revenue if you're down for a little bit of time, but what is the actual infrastructure costs, the human resource costs? You got to take all that into consideration as well, and that's why so many companies are adopting SLOs, because they realize it's actually better for their bottom line. So that's the real argument. Some leaders don't want to accept this. That's why it's difficult to have conversations. But to that, I would say sometimes some people are just wrong, right? And not everyone's ever going to adopt. Not every single person on the planet, right? Every single tech company, or every single company with a tech stack, I should say, is ever going to entirely adopt SLOs, because I don't know, some people are just going to disagree with them. But again, there's a reason so many people are doing it, because it's actually better for your bottom line to not try to spend all the money you need to try to be 100% available, because you're not going to do it anyway.
Yeah, and then there are anecdotal, even there are some surveys that are being done, or calculations that are being done. Let's say if you are providing 96% reliability, and you might be spending, let's say, $1,000 on providing a service. If you want to increase the reliability to, let's say, 99.999 or something like that, it's not like doubling your costs. It goes to almost like $5,000 to like 5 times as much money is needed to provide the same service with that reliability. So somebody has to come and think whether it is worthwhile to spend 5 times more in operations, or that includes infrastructure, people that you pay to manage all these things, and so on. So at some point, it is not a wise decision to do that. Yeah. Next question is actually really important one. So right now, let's say you have operations that are based on like where you are alerting on fixed thresholds, or maybe even dynamic thresholds. And now you want to move to SLO or error budget based alerting and so on. What are the pros and cons of it? Like what advice would you give to the an operations team that wants to convince the engineering team to go with something like that, where not by a threshold based alerting rather than a SLO based alerting?
Well, I mean, there's 2 possibilities here, right? Either the engineering team is on call, or a separate team is, right? And if a separate team is, then the engineering team doesn't get to decide, right? The people who are on call for it get to decide what the monitoring is. Now, if the question's about this is an engineering team who is on call, and you're trying to convince other people on your team, well, I mean, you get so many false positives, especially in the terms of spiky or flapping threshold based alerts, whereas an error budget explicitly by design is intended to absorb those flaps, those slight periods of unreliability, those slight periods of slowness, without automatically triggering a page. So it's, I don't know. It's just, I guess the basic argument is like, do you want to get paged less? And I think almost everyone's going to answer yes, please, or no, I do, or yes, I do want to get paged less.
Yeah, it's the whole point of that one is to actually reduce the number of false positives. Basically, for many a times when you are doing threshold based alerting, what you do is even if you set it to as a P0, you come to it, you look at the data. So let's say you get paged at 2 a.m. for that one. You wake up, you look at the dashboards, maybe the line charts, and then you decide saying that, oh yeah, this doesn't seem to be something that's worthwhile to solve right now at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I can take care of it when I go back to office. Or you might actually say, oh, this is normal, this is fine, even though I got like a spiky behavior over here, it's fine, right? Those can be actually avoided when your criteria is based around error budgets, as long as they are defined judiciously. So all those times when you wake up and then look at the alerts and then you feel that, okay, this is not worthwhile to work on it right now because it's not that urgent, you can avoid all those. How do you define this? Whether those are false positives or whether those are something you decide that doesn't need to be woken up in the middle of the night, that's different. But yes, you can actually avoid many of those. That again goes back to our old point that we had, where employee morale is very important. When you have staff who is doing this over and over, what we call it as a fear of missing out mentality, then people get burnt out. They tend to find another job. So that's one of the crucial reasons why you want to go with a SLO level alerting rather than a threshold based alerting. So the next one would be actually around like
we've hit top of the hour. We're at noon, so we're gonna have to end this now. But want to thank everyone so much. And yeah, we have all these questions stored away, and we'll make sure to answer all of them via email in the coming days. Really appreciate everyone being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.